Thanks very much.
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Oh, no, we divided it differently. I get 20 and Richard gets 10. We made it.
Oh, no.
So, my name is Diff, or Kenneth Crowther. I, for the last 13 years, worked at Toowoomba Christian College. And Richard, who you'll hear from shortly, was my principal. He was actually my principal as I attended there as well from 95 till I graduated in 2003. And over the last probably 10 years, slowly I started to ask questions about what the purpose of education was. Which is a strange thing. That obviously that means that was 3 years into my educational career. And it's a strange thing that it would take that long for a person to ask that question. But the truth is I got into teaching because I really liked young people. I liked hanging out with young people. And I thought, hey, I could get paid to do that. That sounds really good. I wanted to go and teach at the Christian school that I went to. As a Christian, I thought, hey, this would be a good opportunity as well to disciple young people. And really that's what I was there for. But after about 3 or 4 years, something started to happen within me where I started to just question, like, well, there's got to be a deeper purpose here than just, I guess, churning people through. Just getting people from the beginning and to the end and then saying goodbye to them. I didn't feel as though my teaching areas officially are theatre or drama and English, although I've taught a variety of things, Christian studies and philosophy and a variety of other things. And I felt like what was starting to happen automatically was that students, when we were reading books, were asking great questions. And those questions had nothing to do with what we were supposed to be learning about in the books. And they thought, hey, I'm getting Mr. Crowther off topic. This is awesome. He's one of those teachers you can get off topic. And I thought, man, I'm so glad they got me off topic. This is so much better than what apparently we were supposed to be doing. So I started reading. Reading a lot, reading history, and you can never be too careful who you read, and so I started reading C.S. Lewis and then G.K. Chesterton, and these people started to reveal to me a deeper purpose of education. In fact, they had me even ask the question, what is the purpose of education? And the purpose of education very clearly was revealed to me as not being what everybody basically said it was. And when I say everybody, I probably mean students first and parents secondly, and that is to get a job. And this is preaching to the converted in many ways, obviously. But you go out into the world. We go out into the world, and that's what 90% of people will say that education, school education, is about. It's about getting a job. And so we went on a journey at TCC to transition an existing school of more than 700 students, Peter 12, from a standard Christian approach to the curriculum to a liberal arts approach. And Richard will talk a little bit more about how we did that and about the particular unique situation that TCC was in. But that has been the process. And that's been a very interesting journey over the last 6 years. And as I say, Richard will talk more about that. But what I experienced as a leader in that process are some of the obstacles that are faced for creating classical education. So there are 4 that I want to talk about, and then the 4 challenges and then the 4 opportunities that are actually directly related to those challenges. And a lot of this has been discussed already, but hopefully I can find some new ways of thinking about it. We started this morning hearing from David about Keats and Eliot, and so I thought I would try to round it all off by returning to T.S. Eliot. This is part of his poem Choruses from the Rock. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance, all our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death, no nearer to God. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God and nearer to the dust. I believe that that's a profound image of what we're faced with in modern education. We are indeed losing wisdom for the sake of knowledge, knowledge for the sake of information, and information perhaps just for the sake of raw data or project-based learning that doesn't really terminate on anything. other than an experience that we can't really articulate. And I think that classical education is part of the solution. It's not the solution. Culture as a whole is really what we're trying to address here. And education is obviously a way to impact culture, but it won't be the only solution. And therefore, I think that this has been wonderful. This is a dream come true for me. 6-7 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that this was possible. And it's good that there are small things happening. But I really appreciated hearing you speak about your experience on Akara and the idea that we would potentially put together an alternative curriculum framework. Because for us here, either starting schools, as I'm now doing with working with James Power and a group of other men and women in Brisbane, John Henry Newman College, or for the PARED schools, which are doing a great job, or even for schools like TCC, which can make a transition. These are going to be small pockets, very small pockets, like Campion, an incredibly important small pocket of change. But in order to help other people to see the vision of this, to see the possibilities for it, I believe that we need to work together and be very, very purposeful and recognise that it's probably going to be a slow process to put together a well thought through alternative curriculum that is eventually approved by Akara, which will then make it so much easier for other classical schools to be able to start. Because I believe that people want this, they just don't even know what it is. This is what we experienced at TCC. Students couldn't articulate what it was. Parents didn't realise that they wanted it, but as soon as they started getting it, they realised that they wanted this. And I'll speak to that in a moment. The first challenge is initial teacher education. We've spoken about it a little bit today, but it's a massive challenge, initial teacher education. If you know anything about teaching degrees, teachers spend very little time in the classroom. Often that's not until it's a year or maybe even 2 into their degree, depending on their degree. So they've already spent 2 years doing it. Now, what does that mean? It could mean that they've spent 2 years doing it, they get into a classroom, they realise they don't like it, but they're already 2 years down. They've spent that money, they may as well keep going. They're not really taught how to teach either. I couldn't believe this when I went through my own initial teacher education. There were 2 worlds and never the two shall meet. I had education over here, which was teaching me some radical pedagogical or child development theories, and then I had English Lit over here, which was the stuff that I enjoyed. No one taught me how to teach English. They just taught these 2 separate spheres. This is a massive problem that has not been remedied. Of course, for classical schools, there is no classical teacher training, which is going to be a big problem for us going forward. And as has been mentioned many times, and I'm certainly not here to attack teachers because it's a hell of a job, it's a difficult job, and I'm impressed with any teacher that sticks with it, with what has happened to the profession. I think over the time that I've been doing it, 13 years, it's changed dramatically. But that is that there is a lack of knowledge. You can't teach what you don't know. And teachers are a product of the education system that they've already inherited, and then the tertiary system as well, and so they don't know these things. Paul mentioned in his talk the idea of learning from the masters. That's an incredibly offensive idea these days. This idea that the teacher would be the master. But C.S. Lewis, he wrote this in one of his short essays on education. He says, "You see at once that this style of education implies an immense superiority on the part of the teacher. He is trying to make the pupil a good man. The assumption is that the master is already a human, the pupil a mere candidate for humanity. An unregenerate little bundle of appetites which is to be kneaded and moulded into human shape." This is the very opposite of child-centred education, and it's difficult to talk like that these days. And this leads on to the second challenge, which is low standards. Low standards, particularly, unfortunately, in universities. We've heard about that a little bit already. But the truth is that the reason there has to be low standards, even though there doesn't have to be, but economically, universities are in a situation where if they don't pass students, students will leave the class and then they won't get paid, and so they will continue to pass students. I mark university papers. This is a real struggle for me, to mark papers based upon the standard of the university that I wouldn't have passed in grade 11 English at my school. But the standards at the university are downstream from the standards that are accepted in the schools. That's why they can't write, not because of the university. University is, struggling with that, but it's because of what we're accepting in our schools as well. Universities don't want to have to teach students how to write essays. There's an assumption that they already know how to write and they already know how to read because they got into the course. But universities have become more of a business than ever now. And so my understanding is that close to 50% of university entrants last year in New South Wales were from alternate entry pathways, because the universities want the students more than the students obviously almost need the universities. And so they'll take them however they can get them. And the standards are slipping in the schools because we're not really teaching any real content anymore. So it's very difficult to assess against any real standard. It's more about, as we've heard already, a lot of it is about feelings, about subjectivity. The third potential obstacle is the curriculum. And again, we've heard great stuff about the curriculum today, but I'll kind of reiterate the point that I made earlier, that ACARA, I think, has been a blessing. But the states have the control over how that's implemented, and that is different in every state, and the situation in year 11 and 12 can be problematic as well. I would also say that teachers, through their initial teacher education, are drilled as to the importance of ACARA. And so even in a school which is really quite recognises how liberated they can be from that, teachers are terrified of not hitting all of those goals because they think that they're going to get in trouble for it. And finally, it is the utilitarian focus that exists, as I talked about earlier. The idea that schools are about getting jobs. C.S. Lewis says in that same essay, if education is beaten by training, civilization dies. And maybe that's part of what we're all sensing, is that this is a moment in order to be able to stop that from happening. Getting a job is what students think that school is about. But where do they get that from? It's not out of a vacuum. They get it from their parents. The number of times that I sat in a parent-teacher interview and the parent leaned across the desk and whispered to me as if it was just a secret between the two of us, we both know Shakespeare doesn't really matter, right? And I would have to, of course, disappoint them and say, no, it really, really does matter. It's really great. But there's no way that going home and hearing education attacked around the dinner table, or maybe not around the dinner table, but sitting in front of the TV eating dinner, having the parents attack Shakespeare and attack the classics, that's not going to create an atmosphere where that child is ready to learn and care about it. And the specialisation problem, which we've heard about already, Campion is addressing specialisation happening in undergrad, but it's too late at that point, unfortunately. Specialisation happens in year 9 and 10. It's actually too late then. Specialisation is happening as early as grade 1 and grade 2, when little kids are told, because they're not naturally good at English, don't worry, you're a maths kid, don't worry about that. And then they reduce themselves down to this one narrow little way of thinking about themselves. That is the opposite of liberal education. They're becoming a slave to this single vocation from as early as 6 or 7 years old. It's like putting the coins in a coin sorter, and you just find your little way through, and then that's what you do. And you've got no potential, no capacity to understand the fullness of what you're capable of doing, because the schooling system, the very thing designed to liberate the young people, has actually reduced them down to one single idea. All of these problems, though, are actually opportunities. The situation that we're in right now with the teacher shortage is providing a great opportunity to talk about initial teacher education. We've never had conversations like this that I can remember, because all of a sudden people are saying, why are teachers leaving the profession? And we've been saying for a long time why we're leaving the profession. But all of a sudden there's not enough teachers, and now people are starting to listen. It's a great opportunity to speak into, if you want to fix the schools, we've got to start talking about what the purpose of education actually is. Because no one, well, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but few people get into teaching for the kinds of reasons that we're forced to fit into these days. There's a small college, or a university college now, Alpha Crucis, which has got a Teaching Schools Alliance, and it creates these little hubs where people can learn and spend time in schools for a number of years with close to a guaranteed job at the end of it. And the amount of experience that they get in that process compared to what they'd get in a traditional way of doing it is fantastic, and hopefully something that can get adopted further. The second problem that is also an opportunity is standards, because the truth is classical education, if it's done well, is going to reveal great standards, and we heard about that with Harkaway already. I mean, that is already able to be a lighthouse as to what is possible when education is conceived of differently, and Campion's another example of that as well. My experiences at school at TCC were that I had an opportunity in the senior English class. There was 60 in the class or thereabouts, and so we split it into two classes of 30 or 25-ish. And I wanted to teach crime and punishment, and I knew that the students would be able to do it. And my colleague said, you know what, let's give them an option. We can do Tale of Two Cities and crime and punishment. And what that really meant was that I got given the cream. I got given 12 great Year 12 students, and we read Crime and Punishment together, and we'd have Socratic discussions. And that meant that we would just sit down and talk for 2 hours about crime and punishment. Some of the greatest learning that I've ever been involved in. And those students who graduated a number of years ago, one of them is now actually, two of them are now teaching back at TCC, went and studied liberal arts. And they still talk about that day, a particular day that we had one of the greatest discussions that we'd ever had. It's possible to do it, and the standards that come from it speak for themselves. The third is the curriculum, and as I said, Fiona's done a great job of talking about this already, and I do believe that the alternative curriculum framework is something that together we should look at. There's also the great fact that there is a scope, at least I can speak for Queensland, about 20% of the timetable is put aside for a school to be able to use for purposes and education and a curriculum that it sees fit for its own cultural paradigm, which means that it is possible to be able to do some of these great things and not at all have to worry about ACARA, because there is room within the timetable to do more, to go beyond. And the final thing is the utilitarian focus, and perhaps that's the thing where it's difficult to find a positive out of that challenge. But what I would say is this: the parents might see the school as utilitarian, and the students might say that they do, but students actually see through it, and they realise that it doesn't make any sense. We heard a little bit at the end there from Karina about hope, and the kind of hope that can be offered through a classical education. One of my favourite quotes is from a book called Acedia and Its Discontents, and it talks about the idea of freedom that Paul mentioned earlier, this kind of adolescent negative view of freedom rather than positive liberty. And he says this, the author R.J. Snell: modern freedom resulted when older moral horizons were uprooted, when liberation from captivity of divine order was attained. These words are in inverted commas. This is a liberation from the captivity of divine order. Free, yes, but the world seems to have lost its story, and we suffer a sense of malaise and emptiness. As Charles Taylor explains in A Secular Age, our freedom is disembedded from reality, with the resulting terrible flatness in the everyday, the utter flatness and emptiness of the ordinary. Our freedom came at a cost, the loss of anything worth living for, and the only remainder is a centering on the self. And since the world is devoid of thickness, everything becomes a plaything, something to tame, toy with, lead about on a leash, and discard when we have drained its temporary pleasure. That's what I see in the lives of students. And students are living in this world, and so because of that, the utilitarian argument doesn't actually wash with them. They kind of can see through it. They can see the emptiness of it. They're looking for meaning, and they're looking for order. And one of my favourite, if not my favourite definitions of education is from C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man. And he refers to Plato calling education ordo amoris. It's ordered affections. It's ordered loves. And integrated learning in the classical sense, it teaches an integrated reality because it teaches actual reality. And it teaches us how to respond to it rightly. I couldn't not quote John Henry Newman, seeing as that he's the patron saint of the school that we're putting together. And this, I think, is a very helpful response when we think about classical education and people accusing it of being, all theory and not that helpful for the 21st century. He says, though the useful is not always good, the good is always useful. And if we focus on that, then young people actually can see past this illusion of utilitarian approach to education. Because when they're given meaning again, when they're given the eyes to be able to see meaning, they'll go out and contribute to the world because they've got a purpose and a reason to do so. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Wasn't always like that at school. No, it's one of the delights of being a teacher and an educator is you actually see people go ahead of you as the Lord makes it possible. And Diff, so proud of what you've presented. 2017 was a turning point for Toowoomba Christian College. We're the student numbers of about 700 students. We'd grown up from about, when I took over, of about 130 students up to 700 in a pretty competitive town. In Toowoomba itself, there's 17 high schools that are private, only 5 state high schools, 8 boarding schools. And so when you come in and you're offering Christian education, you are one of many that would like to consider themselves part of the team. And the question is, what have you got to offer? Why would a parent want to come your way when there is so many other choices? Got a GPS school in town, got the largest girls' boarding school in town, got the prestige of a range of schools in town that if you were interested in those things, you'd go that way. Lots of older families that have been in town for a long period of time, they've got their traditions of where they would go. And so when a new school starts, and it starts as sort of in a poor way as we started, and I don't think it's unfair to our founders to say that they had the right passion, but they just didn't know how to deliver it. And you pay for that over time because those people who were so committed to you in those early days sort of disappear on you as time goes on. And now you're in the marketplace and you've got to be able to sell your product, if I can put it as crudely as that. Well, 2017 was a crucial time for us because, as Diff's already alluded to, the fact that we have for over 10 years now been considering as almost a free-range Christian school because we were outside of the ATAR system, we weren't part of the OP system in Queensland, we had pioneered our own way, our students were graduating into university, so we had it in one sense, we're able to be what we wanted to be. But as the principal of the school, I was not happy with the product of the young people that were coming out. They answered the questions well in a Christian context. As soon as you took them out of the Christian context, they weren't able to stand as strong as they wanted, as we wanted. And I was challenged by what am I doing? What else do I need to do to get our young people to be standing strong in the face of opposition once they leave the school? I had 4 children. Well, I had 4 children. They all went through the school. I've now got 2 grandchildren, and one of those 5 grandchildren. 2 of them are school age, and one of them's in the school. And you see the world differently when you're a grandfather, because now you desperately want to see it work for your granddaughter. And so, where she's up to now, she's into year 1 and spelling list. Grandpa rings on the phone. Here's the spelling words, and I'm going through them with her, and it's an exciting experience. But I'm looking over the hill, aren't I? I'm wondering about where all this is going. What is going to be happening for her? When she gets into year 2 at TCC, she'll be parsing a sentence. She'll be knowing what the subject is. She'll be knowing what the verb is. She'll be knowing how to add an adverb and an adjective because that's the description that the teacher will be giving. Why are we up to that? Because what happened in 2017? In 2017, 5 of us decided to go down to Hobart. 4 of us went down to Hobart to be part of a conference that David ran. And it was in that time that we thought this was our moment, that we had to make a decision. Would we get involved in liberal arts or not? As the leader of the team, I was happy to do it, but I knew I now had huge things to consider with the board, with parents, with staff, with the finances and all of those things. But the vision started to crystallise for us because we started to hear about virtues as opposed to values. We started to hear about what it was like to consider character and wisdom, and to consider telos instead of techne. And these words just came alive for us. And so on the Hobart Airport, after listening to all of that, we looked at each other and said, will we? Will this be our Rubicon? Will we cross this river? And we decided, yes, we would. Well, later on that year, through funding that came from our state government, we sent over 7 staff to Texas to be part of a classical education conference. Took some high schools, some primary, sent them over to the States, and they came back alive with it. I sent over my art teacher. Let me just tell you about art at TCC. We're a Christian school. When you do an art piece, somewhere there's got to be a cross on your art piece. Where was it? Well, you had to look hard. Why? Because the art teacher, a young man, had decided that he'd go with the flow of culture and paint what you feel. And what was it? Dark. Blood. Agony. Pain. Suffering. That's what was the paintings. But somewhere up in the top right-hand corner would be the little red cross to say that there's hope, but the balance of it was all out. Now we're at a point where the artwork of our students is on display in the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, because our students have had their work selected to go as one of 37 across Queensland to be hung as Year 12's work. And what does it look like? It looks like a masterpiece in the sense that it's not them telling their story, they're identifying in a larger story. And so we have some work there, and if I had more time I'd tell you more about it. But I'm excited about what can actually take place. And I'm excited to be here today in Melbourne, hearing from a sector that I don't know too much about, but wanting to encourage you, there's a great journey ahead. As the leader of the school for a number of years, I know what it's like to handle the challenges over dealing with your staff, 100 staff. How are we going to get them on board? How are we going to make these subtle changes because school's got to go on? And even though our school started back in 1979 where there was very few interventions by government, it's now gone to the other extreme. You've now got to satisfy government in so many areas to qualify for your funding. So to manage those things through. And my plea to those of you who are thinking of being involved in these things, you won't have the same opportunity to start as I did. You've now got to be wise as serpents and as innocent of doves and play the game correctly. That's why I'm so pleased to hear people talk today. Play within the boundaries of it, but play wisely. But I wanted to leave you with this thought, that there's old folk like me. I retired at the end of term 1 this year. There's old folk like me that are somewhat available now. I'm not looking for a gig or anything else like that. I'm just saying, Lord, what have you got for me to be able to inspire some others about the journey that they're on? For a long period of time, I felt like I was the man firing the arrows. I was the archer. I was directing traffic. I was knowing where it's all going. Now I feel like I'm a Fletcher. I'm a maker of arrows. I've got time in my hands now. And others that have retired, I've got some great colleagues that have retired. We can make some arrows for people. We're just not on the firing line now to fire them. On the way down here, I spent some time reading a couple of books in my Kindle. There I am, I'm underlining this and underlining that. I'm full of quotes. Not as good as Diff, but I've got quotes, so I can go find them. And I'm thinking like, Lord, what do you want me to do with all this? I love it. I'll read it. I'll keep going while I'm able. For the sake of my grandchildren and others' grandchildren, I'm in. What can I do? So I've got a list of 5 books here for you to consider, and 2 of them are classics, but we don't know they're classics because they were the foundation for leadership over centuries. One written by Cicero called On Duties, De Officiis. Classic. Did you know about it? It talks about what needs to happen to develop a culture and a society that will hang together through hard times. Another one was called The Education of Cyrus by Xenophon. Google those two, go to Wikipedia, and you'll find out that these were foundational leadership books of training for people. And we just lost them. It's time to regurgitate the information that has been handed down from down through the centuries that can really help us. So there's lots of challenges. I've got a list. I don't think you need to hear them. But the opportunities is to do this, and this is what I found out of the Christian school movement I was in Queensland. Find allies. Find people that were willing to share their resources and their time with you. Back in the early 1990s when I became a principal, if I had a problem, what would I do? I'd ring. Who would I ring? One of my mates. Not a head office, because we didn't have a head office. And they would be willing to share time and resources and staff to help me solve the problem I was facing. I've grown up with that over 30 years, and it's precious to find allies that are willing to share, and that's the background I've got. So find allies and find some arrow makers, and then get up to the fight and fire those arrows, and we're going to see great victories come. Thank you.
So we've got time for a couple of questions.